we'll kick things off. This is, I think, the third session we are having on EBOT since market engagement has started and since we've started working on this epic. There's a series of epics that we have in various program increments related to EBOT processing. John's going to share some slides. There's material that we have shared previously, and I think John's included them in the appendices as an FYI, particularly for those attendees who've not been in the previous workshops. So the focus of today's workshop obviously is going to be the agenda that John presents today. So without further ado, I'll hand over to John, who will take us through the slides and the material.
Thank you very much, Jay. So this afternoon's agenda takes into account some of the feedback which we had from the earlier sessions back in end of June, beginning of July. One of the main points raised was around giving some visibility to the process flows associated with our proposed use of the EBOT guidelines, EBOT standards within the IPOS process for the digital processing service. So this afternoon we are going to kick off with a diagram and talk you through the processes for the technical account and settlement. These are going to be modelled against the diagrams which actually appear within the EBOT guidelines themselves. So for technical account, if anyone wants to access the EBOT guidelines, it's page 5, and EBOT settlement, it's page 6 of the guidelines. Those slides, the original ACORD slides, are also included as slides 14 and 15 in this deck. So if people want to go backwards and forwards between our proposal and the original EBOT material, then they are welcome to do that. Once we've concluded the process overviews, I just want to talk quickly about the market portal, the capability which we're proposing to build, which would support the manual keying and injection of EBOT technical accounts and financial account message data into the process and interact then with the level 3 and level 4 responses. So this portal is designed as a transitional step for any organisations which as yet have not made the formal investment in ACORD and ACORD gateways or use of the ASG exposed APIs. So this is something which we want to encourage smaller firms potentially to use pending their transition to using the full set of available services for in the ACORD space.
And John, when you talk about smaller firms, are you talking specifically about brokers here, or is the portal something you're expecting?
Yeah, this particular capability is in respect of brokers.
Thank you.
Yeah, I should also remind you, and as you're probably aware, brokers will still have continued access to the accounting and settlement direct load capability, which is part of the IMR, and they will still have access to the ACORD DRI capability. So we're not necessarily forcing any broker down any particular path. It's just this is just seen as an existing capability which will help people along the journey to more formalised ACORD adoption. Following on from that, just some more detail around identification of parties. So how do we identify the broker, the insurer, reinsurer, etc., which are the subjects of the accounting transactions? And then the last part of the presentation is to talk, not a presentation because we do want your discussion and points from it, but the last thing to talk about is the availability of the EBOT technical account data and or other signing data available through ACORD messaging to carrier participants. So we'll talk you through what the current bill proposal is, and then we'll also reference the work which the design office is doing in consideration of potentially being able to extend beyond what our current bill proposal is. For people who've attended the earlier sessions, some of the slides of those earlier sessions, plus any conclusions we came to from small pieces of analysis, are included within the appendix. I'm not intending to talk about them today, but if we have time at the end, then obviously it'll be available to you to talk to those if you wish to. So without any more, we'll move on to the process overviews. So the process flows here. The boxes, arrows, which are in green and black, are all effectively drawn directly from the diagrams in the EBOT guidelines. The elements, the processes in this gold brown font are things which are specific to the IPOS proposition, and just down below we've just got some notes and annotations to some of the process steps. This isn't the formal specification, this is really just to help people navigate and understand the process at this juncture. Clearly a more formal specification will be issued at some point in the process. So starting off with step one, the broker will prepare the technical account when they wish to seek agreement to a particular transaction. The broker will act as the broker. The receiver will be the DPS service as a service provider, but within the technical account you'll still identify the insurer, reinsurer, etc. as the actual carriers. The use of an account entry reference is required to link together where there are more than one bureau market carrier participating on the same transaction. So within the DPS service, we still work within the bureau idiom, and therefore we need a way to group together that this transaction relates to one or more firms within a bureau. We've still to fully define whether that account entry reference can be a common value across Lloyd's, ILU and Lerma, or whether it needs to be a separate value separating Lloyd's from IUA. So ILU and Lerma would be have a different account entry reference, or whether we're actually going to need separate account entry references for Lloyd's, ILU and Lerma. Our hope is that we can get you to just having a single common reference across the whole of the London market, and we will then do the work to actually segregate and separate the syndicates from the IUA member companies.
So John, just in practical terms, sorry for, is it okay to ask a question?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
So in practical terms, today, a broker, let's assume it's an EBOT broker, would send, well, let's forget whether it's EBOT or LPANs. Today, a broker would send for a mixed market, one LPAN for the syndicates and another LPAN for the bureau company on the same risk, and you process two transactions in two separate systems. Is what you've just described exploring the improvement to be able to process just one transaction on one system for all subscribing bureau carriers?
At the moment, the internals within the bureau, in terms of signing separately to the Lloyd's market from ILU and Lerma market, that separation will still exist.
Okay, be interested to understand the logic for why you would want to keep set 2 transactions on one system rather than one transaction with multiple carriers from different markets. Because the given here is, however it ends up, you've got to have data segregation. So is the forced separation the only means of achieving data segregation? Or, yeah, we need to, I've been asking this question in different places over the last couple of weeks, so just keen to get clarity on what the art of the possible is going to be, now that you're operating on one IPOS system, not 2.
Yeah, I fully understand the question as it's currently presented in terms of the internal model, which requires a DPS technician to review and approve something for signing. There is still that separation across pretty much all business. There is some Excel business which I believe a combined companies and Lloyd's signing can be made, but
Yeah,
outside of that, we are still operating within the current the pipeline still evolves to the current set of processes. Technically, if people decide that they can change the internal process, then this model can support that change, and it will be an efficiency to do so from our perspective, but that's not my pay grade decision.
No, that's fine. That's good to know that technically it is feasible, and the constraint, both from a data segregation and a kind of transaction processing point of view, if the constraint ends up being just purely we haven't got people skilled to do both flavors of transaction processing, that's an entirely different conversation. So thank you for the clarity there.
Okay, so moving on, the next stage in the EBOT process is to validate the technical account. This is level 3 at a validation, and this will be against the ACORD schema and the EBOT XSLT strict validator. So everything which is currently validated for EBOT will continue to be validated. That extends to also completion of groups where a group ID and count, a settlement amount, a settlement group ID and count, and a transaction group ID and count are included within the technical account messages. All of that work is going to be conducted on our behalf via by ASG and the Adept Gateway. So the Bureau themselves do not receive any groups of technical accounts, or we do not receive any technical accounts which fail those XSD and XSLT validations. Moving on, so in the event that there is level 3 application is passed, then the level 3 AC will be sent back to the broker. If the level 3 validation fails, then you get the rejection message. Step 5 in the process relates to...
One quick question. On that level 3 rejection, who does that go back to? Is the broker and the carrier?
It goes to the broker. All of these interactions at this juncture are between the broker and DPS as the service provider, as the Bureau acting on your behalf. There is no visibility for the carriers to things which have effectively not got to the stage at which the DPS have agreed that transaction on your behalf. Okay. So you don't see have any visibility to this upstream stuff until
level 4.
Yeah.
Yep, got you.
Okay. Right. So the next step 5, is the management of reversals. So where the broker advises a requirement to reverse a transaction, or an individual technical account within transaction, they can do that, and conditional upon there not have reached a completion of the business validation at level 4, acknowledgement response, then the process is to basically clear any outstanding queries and mark both of the technical accounts as completed. Both of them, both the reversal and the subject of the reversal get
John,
completed.
in terms of that, what would happen if the original went through paper LPANs and the cancellation went through a tech account?
At the moment, the transition approach has to be you would have to start your journey for a transaction wholly and exclusively within one channel, and you would have to conclude it within that channel.
So we'll have a dual process.
So you couldn't have a situation where you've loaded LPANs into IMR or use DRI to do that on your behalf, and then move to send EBOT technical accounts.
Okay, that's not in line with EBOT though.
Pardon?
That's not in line with EBOT.
Not sure. So shall we?
Yeah, I think Jay, if you can just record that Mark's point, and then we can follow up. We haven't published what the transitional arrangements are, but our basic working assumption is you have to start a transaction using EBOT process. You can't pick up that transaction part way through and then start using EBOT against it.
I think one of the challenges,
either for reversal or for the settlement process.
Right. So just to add to what you're saying, John, one of the challenges we'll have is the cancellation or reversal has to reference the original technical account in the message itself, and that wouldn't exist if the original came in via the LPAN route.
So Jay, just on that point, it doesn't have to. In terms of if you go through that process of something goes through paper, the cancellation or reversal goes through EBOT, it doesn't need to go back or refer to the original tech account. It can refer to itself. So there are some rules in there around cancel and replaces.
Okay. Okay. In that case, we will follow up. I'm not aware of those. They're not. I haven't seen them in the EBOT guide. But if there is something in the
Sorry, can you repeat that again, Mark?
Yeah, so basically what happens if you have a cancellation go through and the original went through paper, EBOT stipulates you can cross-reference the cancellation on itself. So effectively it's going not referring to the original because you can't.
Yeah, so the UUID, I believe in that instance, has either all nines, Jay. So the referred UUID would, it doesn't refer to itself, it has all nines as the UUID.
Okay. I haven't seen a reference to that in the EBOT guide, but I'll pick it up with you offline, Clarissa.
Yeah,
there's a way around
it is
that,
allowed, but they kind of do a dodgy workaround by putting nines in there.
Okay, fair enough.
So it's Rob here. Can I just check understanding? Because I want to make sure I'm keeping up with the story. So when we talk about reversals, are we talking about the reversal of a technical account submission that has only just started its journey through the service and hasn't yet got to the, for want of a better phrase, to the processing engine, and the broker realizes they shouldn't have done something, they want to back out of that? Or are we talking about the reversal of a technical account that was processed as an EBOT a week ago, and now you want to cancel that and start again? Yeah. Okay. So same transaction, you've got to back out of it, or both.
Right. So Rob, good intervention. So here, this reversal is where the technical account which is to be reversed has not yet been agreed.
It's not completed its journey. Yeah.
It has not completed its journey, and the reversal catches up with it, and basically they both, the reversal and the reversing, both get marked as completed. There is a separate the separate scenario is where a transaction has been agreed, but thereafter either the broker identifies that that agreed transaction was in some way incorrect and they wish to nullify the effect of that transaction, and that can be done through a cancellation. And as Mark highlights, because that cancellation is a separate discrete transaction, then you could use EBOT to cancel a transaction which had previously been agreed via one of the other channels. So okay. Mark, you were correct in terms of the applicability of this for cancellation. Yep. The reversal is it hasn't even got agreed yet.
So last question, if I may, on this bit. If you imagine a risk that's got an original premium that's processed as an LPAN, 3 or 4 endorsements to it that get processed as LPANs, in the life of that risk, when endorsement 5 comes along, can the broker revert to EBOT submission mid-life?
A qualified, yes.
Thank you.
Clearly, the qualification, it would be around if there were an agreed pattern of instalments agreed, say via LPAN, then that's fine. If there was
I'm not talking about instalments. I'm talking about just good old-fashioned endorsements.
Yeah. So 10 months into the policy, a client acquired a new airliner, then obviously that could be endorsed and go through as an AP.
Thank you.
Through the EBOT process, even though the original premium signing had not gone through EBOT.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to step 7. This is an additional step injected into the EBOT process for DPS processing, and this basically takes account of that account entry reference provided by the broker in the technical account to group the carrier technical accounts for the same bureau on the same transaction. And this is because currently the bureau processors use that group of carriers on the transaction as its unit of work. So they don't agree each individual carrier separately. They agree the group of carriers for that bureau, and that's the unit of transaction which we work with downstream. As Rob's highlighted, there could be options to supergroup that, so it's just a single transaction for all London market carriers. There is no proposal at the moment to look at processing individual carriers and agreeing individual carrier entries, which is the typical EBOT process, a single sender, single receiver. Moving on through the process, our next step 8 again is an additional step which isn't referenced within the EBOT process guidelines, but we are proposing that where documents are referenced within the supporting information section of the technical account, that those documents would be retrieved and stored in the IMR. Where there are the same document being presented for each carrier within the bureau transaction, then only a single copy of that document is stored, but the access control list for that document in the IMR incorporates all the carriers who are eligible to view it. And additionally, we have to get this confirmed, but if there are documents presented in stream within the ACORD technical account message, those would also be crystallized out to their own attachment, and those documents would also be stored in the IMR as a discrete document. Moving on to the next step, The EBOT process guidelines ask for a business validation of the technical account. For the DPS service, we are going to do that effectively in two parts. Part one is to run a set of automated checks. So we're taking work which a bureau technician would typically visually verify or check, and we're implementing some automated rules against the technical account data to confirm the business validity of the proposed transaction. In the event that there was a failure of one of those automated business rules, then the query process, as defined with an EBOT, kicks in. So there would be a query acknowledgement message presented back to the broker, which is in step 12. If the automated checks pass, then within the bureau, we are then going to have a further sanctions check prior to the transaction being presented to the business technician. In the event that there are any issues arising with that sanctions check, then conditional dependent upon the issue, then it may be raised back with the broker, but that would be done out of band. So we're not proposing to use query acts to raise any concerns which arise from sanctions checks. That would have to be done as an out of band conversation with the broker. Once it's passed that into the bureau's internal sanctions check, then it gets presented to the business, the technician, to further confirm that the technical account is valid. As part of that step, there will also be work conducted by that technician to create any non-fundamental split entries which apply to the desired bureau processing of those entries, and those splits will be again different sets of splits applicable to Lloyd's market from RUA markets. As part of doing those checks, the technician is also, we're anticipating the technician will also have access to data in the CDR to help confirm the contract details. In the event that
apologies, there's a few hands up. I don't know if you can see them.
Okay, all right, okay, sorry. So I'm just going to do chat. Okay, I can't see actually who's.
Hi, sorry, John. I had a question.
Oh, sorry. So, yeah, sorry. Yeah, I've got you now. Sorry.
It's a question around step 10, the sanctions check, and I just wanted to understand what the rationale was for not having some kind of stop to then pass it back to a broker. If there's a sanction check trigger, then why are we letting it go through and continue? I mean, I hear you're saying you were going to do something offline, but then the process will then continue, right? There is no stop, and it should stop. There's a sanction check.
Yeah. If the sanctions, so first and foremost, clearly it's very difficult to define exactly what the nature of the sanctions query might be and whether is appropriate to engage with the broker to get a resolution of that query. If internally it was felt that this was not a transaction which they could process, then it would still probably go to the technician to raise that query acknowledgement against the transaction. So whilst the flowchart doesn't show any exit to the query process, that in reality would be the internal process which would take place.
Okay. Okay.
I just have a question on that one. So if we're not using the two-way query process, what status would the message be if we went back to the broker? Would it be queried?
It would be queried.
Okay.
And then
Offline.
So it wouldn't proceed to that step 9b. It would be queried offline if it was determined that the transaction could not continue. Then per the protocol which has been agreed, you would raise a query acknowledgement, and then in subsequent dialogue where consensus is reached between the broker and the DPS technician, then that technical account can be rejected.
So would it just be queried up to that point? Or
It would be queried to that point, and then it would go to rejected if it could not proceed without any sort of correction. Okay. The trouble is, it could just be, one of these false positives type things, which, after being queried, everyone realizes what the mistake was, and it could be, perfectly valid to proceed. It could need a correction by the broker and representation, or it could just end up with a blanket, no, we can't proceed with this transaction. It's gonna need to be rejected. So that's the problem, is you have a multitude of potential outcomes, which is very difficult to draw based on trying to keep as close to the EBOT process diagram as possible.
So that rejection, is after 3 days? I can't remember what the timelines are now to the broker.
No, we in the discussions we had at the end of June, early July, the agreed protocol was that the query ACK would be raised, that then there can be dialogue as shown in boxes 13 and 14, but it would only be at the point at which both the broker and the DPS technician agreed that something should be rejected, that rejection would be initiated to reject the response. There was not a timeline, an automated timeline associated with that.
So that's different from today's process?
If today's process in PBS or in the other Bureau channels is 3 days, that is not applying here.
Okay, got you.
And just around all of this, is Simon here. I think we've said a number of times from an EBOT process, this is suboptimal that we get L4 acknowledge messages out of the end of it, because most of the Ruchlicon carriers have built automated interfaces into their PAS systems. So the whole point of the L4 acknowledgement was to reconcile and finish the job against our own systems. So receiving everything at the end as L4 acknowledged. And if you look at our rate of success of allocation on USMs, it's about 50%. So there's also going to be work around here about reporting, about how many items are stuck in this query process, because there's Ruchlicon guidelines about the queries taking no more than 10 days. So if there's a big pile of TAs that I've got stuck in here that you're trying to get agreement for, how do I get visibility about where those bits are stuck and what's happening?
So definitely agree with you. There will be some higher order reporting, which allows identification of what percentage of transactions are within a query state and the age of those queried items. We've recognised that already. In terms of onward visibility to carriers, the EBOT structure is between a single sender and receiver, and
well, actually, I'd like to refute that. It isn't, because a broker can send one risk to multiple parties. It's just on the company, we send all of the direct percentages. So it still takes one risk and sends it to 10 different participants. So I know everybody says that's the case, but that's because the messaging splits all those risks. So I just think we have to clearly think through how this is going to work, because otherwise you're going to create a mountain of blockages here. Everything's fine if all the CDRs are presented. If we get all the CDRs for the original risks and all the CDRs for the endorsements, then you get a fairly happy path. But I think it's the challenge of when that doesn't work and what happens with all those exceptions.
So the query portal that we are also designing is another mechanism, Simon, for even if the query is directed at a broker, for all interested parties to review those queries that have access or are parties to that contract or that premium submission. So there is that mechanism. I think if what you're referring to is a separate dialogue between the JV and the carrier to resolve queries, that is something that I think John references in one of his slides, as well as something with the design office, but that's not in our current scope.
But the problem we've got is that we effectively pay for this messaging process. Yeah, we pay the fees for this service. Yes. And if at the end of it we get a cumbersome, difficult process to manage remaining queries, which doesn't use the current EBOT structure in the way it was designed, I keep being told that there's a query portal we're going to see and it's all going to work fine, but I think we need more information about how that's going to work and what's going to happen. Sure. Because my worry is that there's a big volume of mismatches.
Sure. I mean, I use the EBOT standard in terms of queries, Simon. I don't know why we can't do that.
Why do we have to use the L4 acknowledgement though? Why can't we just do a match and say it's matched against the CDR and leave the L4 unmatched, and then we can still run all of our system integration routines?
Simon, can I comment here? It's Rob, because this touches on a question I posed in the chat. I think this is this model you're talking about here relevant to phase 1 or phase 2 or both? Because you talked about technician interventions at step 9. Well, in phase 2, when we've got an external core data record complete and valid and filed away in the data store through the gateway, and we've got an ACORD EBOT coming in, my expectation has been that, not for all, but for many, it'll be a straight auto match, and it either passes or it fails. And the business validation rules will be applied within the receipt handling process and not by a technician, unless it falls out to be an exception. So is this story phase 1, phase 2, or both? Just trying to understand that.
This is phase 2, I think, in it, because phase 1, nothing changes for us as a recipient. We'll still be on the current EDIs.
Well, no, it's quite conceivable in phase 1. A broker might, I mean, Lockton's have been, might be sending EBOTs into the bureau, and there is no CDR to cut to.
But we as a recipient, it won't be any different effectively, will it?
I don't know. This is the story so far has been, I think, about a broker's submission of an EBOT into a process.
So at the moment, all we are considering here is the process flow between the broker as a sender and DPS as a service provider.
So Rob, to your point about
the requirement for a technician check is based on it is not always possible to fully automate all checks, which the DXE technician would need to make. So in many cases, they will still need to refer to the supporting information, and they will still need to resort to the actual text of the MRC contract, because the core data record is only an abstraction of certain data points within that overarching contract. So there is still going to be a technician check.
John, there's another conversation in a parallel universe happening about the extent to which straight-through processing in phase 2 mode, where there is a CDR, where there's an EBOT technical account coming in, there is a conversation happening in another field around how much STP can be achieved based on version 3.2 of the CDR. Okay, so I hear you, but there is an expectation there will be some straight-through processing, and we are on a quest to understand how much. So I'd suggest we need to show. I'd suggest we need to show a story here where STP is achieved and achievable, and where it is not achievable, and there has to be some exception handling and technician intervention. If this is a phase 2, there's an external CDR in play, there's an EBOT coming in from the broker. We need to show the happiest path of straight-through processing, and the intervention path where it falls out as an exception requires some hands-on involvement of a technician.
And that's agreed, isn't it? It should be designed to do those automated checks.
That's what we're expecting, Simon. But there's a conversation happening somewhere else about how much of that's actually going to be realised.
Yeah, I'm aware of those conversations which are looking to say, what is the future role of the technician, and what proportion of the technician's current responsibilities can be displaced by automated validations, either just using the data presented in the technical account, or when supplemented with data available from the core data record. But as it stands, my understanding is that there will still, the default position is a technician will still check every single accounting transaction presented, and they have ultimate responsibility, even in phase 2.
Okay, that's the first time anyone's actually said that out loud. So thank you for saying it.
But that seems to be contrary to the whole point of what we're trying to do in Automator.
Certainly does.
Rob, may I suggest that you said there are some separate conversations happening at a higher level than ours around that. So until we get to the conclusion of those conversations and we have a clear statement that says straight-through processing is possible in some scenarios, which obviously will also rely on the analysis we have yet to do on the CDR. So far, John and myself, we've been looking at EBOT in isolation. We know there's going to be a CDR. We know we have to retrieve data from the CDR, but there, I suspect some of those conversations are also pending the analysis to say what's in the CDR, what's not in the CDR.
Okay, Jay, I hear you. Let's get that work completed. But I would just add the JV looked at CDR version 3.1.1 and hopefully 3.2 some months ago and confirmed its acceptance.
But has anyone from the JV said, yes, we will have straight-through processing as a consequence of that? If they have, because that's not the message I've got.
That was the purpose of getting the JV to examine the CDR several months ago, to deliver how not for everything, but for some things to be defined. Is this CDR adequate? Is CDR plus an ACORD technical account equals straight-through processing? How often for open market direct and FAC RI business and risk premiums can that be achieved? That's the question we're waiting for an answer to. But that is absolutely where the expectation is.
Sure, I understand that.
And not the default being a technician will have to manually inspect every single EBOT technical account where there's an external CDR available also.
I suggest for the purposes of this call, if we can park that straight-through processing conversation to the side to allow us to progress with this. I think there's other factors in play and other conversations happening on the sideline as well, Rob. So we need to address that separately, I think. Okay, John, back to you. There's actually still a couple more hands, I think.
Okay, sorry.
I think my hand was the next one. It was a question around the sanctions. I mean, certainly if we're being asked as a broker to confirm anything regarding sanctions or supplier documentation, then we would want an L4 query coming back. It sounds like further down the process we're going to get that, because what we currently get on the ANS world is a query raised. We'd be expecting the same thing for EBOT, so that we could issue a response with either text or with any attachments that DXC are looking for. We need that L4 query to be able to provide that. Don't want to do it out of band. So if you're expecting anything from a broker in terms of documentation and or comment, I would prefer to do that via an L4 process.
Is there any dissension from what Danny's just expressed?
It's Sarah from Willis here. No, we would absolutely expect the L4 query. Okay. I'm not quite sure how we'd handle it here if you didn't send us an L4 query.
Okay.
I'm just going to say we're about halfway through. I don't know how we're tracking on time to get through with the material today, but maybe it's worth just having a check.
Yeah, we're substantially behind, so I'll attempt to speed up on some of the rest of this.
Sorry, John, there's still a couple of hands up. Paul,
oh,
do you
sorry,
want...
yeah, sorry.
No, that's okay. Paul.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a quick one actually. On Diamond 9A, you've got the TA business validation auto checks. Is there a definitive list of the auto checks? And if so, why aren't they pushed forward to the broker so they can make sure their TA that goes in won't actually get tripped up by something later on?
Yeah, so we are proposing to issue as part of the specification a full list of all of those automated validations, which will include, the basis for what the validation is, the basis for it, and it will also identify the error message which would be provided in the query ACK should that validation fail. We're still collating those to try and ensure that we can make it as comprehensive as possible. Clearly, seeking to meet, Rob's goal and the market's goal to have as close as possible straight through processing.
It's not my goal. It's the Blueprint 2 goal.
Yeah, I did qualify it as the market's goal.
Moreover, if your sanctions checking is could be shared as well, then maybe sanctions check could be done once with the knowledge that it'll pass through that phase as well.
So what we talking about, John? Here is it level 3 validation or level 4?
No, these are level 4 validations.
Okay.
So the ASG gateway will give you the level 3 validation responses. Thereafter, EBOT requires that you can't issue a subsequent level 3, so it has to be a level 4 validation.
So level 3 is in line with. Sorry, come on, carry on. Sorry.
Yeah. So the business auto validations or manually identified validations or sanctions check failures would all have to be as level 4 query.
Yeah. Got you. So level 3 is in line with EBOT, I guess. Yeah. Level 4, yeah, okay.
Alan?
Hi, just quickly on the non-fundamental splits. So by looking at this, it sounds like brokers will submit in the normal way at a fundamental level, and the JV will use the CDR to create the non-fundamental splits in the new world, but where a CDR is available, and where it's not, there would be queries raised to gather that information. Just wanted to check that was the correct understanding.
That's correct. So the technician would look to see if the broker had provided the information needed to do those non-fundamental splits as supporting attachment in the IMR, for example. They may need to look at market reform contract itself to complete other aspects of the splits. I would just qualify that the CDR does support recording of a number of the different split dimensions, but it's along something of an 80-20 rule. So there will be still types of splits and types of reporting, especially to the Lloyd's market, for which the CDR, even if fully completed, would not support, which again comes back to a technician activity to make those non-fundamental splits.
Okay, no, thanks for clarifying.
Sarah, you've got your hand up as well.
Hi, yes, I was going to ask whether there was going to be some specific EBOT guidance for how it works with the London Central Services in the same sort of way as we've just done all the work with ACORD on the CRMP message that aligns to the CDR. Is there going to be something similar, saying any particular things people need to do or restricted value lists and that kind of stuff from ACORD, or will it be down to yourselves to produce the implementation guidance for how you use EBOT with London?
Yeah, I think
where
it
would
be
people
down,
look for that?
It would be down to, so there was something like that published with PBS, the implementation guide. That's one of the deliverables we have to produce, the JV has to produce, Sarah.
Thank you. So is that something that will come out later, or is that already available?
It's not already available. It will come out later. It'll be a deliverable for in readiness for phase 2, which is when EBOT and CDR become available.
Thank you.
Just to add to that, these presentations and discussions are helping us to inform exactly what that specification will look like. We do value your feedback in these discussions. To move on in the process flow, an additional step 16, where the technical account advises that the payment means is to be in cash. That will be taken to identify that there is not a requirement to have delinking of the technical account transaction from the settlement transaction, and thereafter that agreed technical account would move into the central settlement process. So that's just an additional
just step. On that, John, I think this step here, the process flow is shown, needs to change slightly, because with the payment means equaling in cash, what that means is the actual payment date is determined at that point, which obviously you would need to know between 9B and 11 to actually include the actual payment date in the acknowledgement going out to the broker. So for me, 16 sits in between 9B and 11, not off to the side. And similarly, from 15 coming back out, the no question, obviously, again, it could be that the payment means is in cash, so it would need to go into that and into the prepare accept tax rather than straight into prepare accept.
You're correct on
both.
Just to
clarify on that one.
Sorry, Tim, you're correct on both of those, but we just didn't have we just wanted to avoid the complexity of having to draw that. Yeah, so if we establish that it's going to central settlement, then the expected actual payment date would be included within the ACK response.
So is that, Tim, just clarify on that one, is that from the broker stating cash TA?
Yes, this is the broker exchange, yes.
Yeah.
There'll be another question later on another slide about APDs for carriers.
Okay. So that would release the link signing at the APD?
Yeah, so we're going to come on to the settlement process.
Oh, sorry. Okay, yeah, I'm
pretty much straight away.
Ahead.
Yeah, I mean, and that the basis of EBOT is two-stage. Well, indeed, the ACORD GRLC standards is a two-stage process: the technical agreement of a transaction, and then the subsequent release for settlement of that agreed transaction. So that's the default position, is a delinked position. It would only be if payment means was identified by the broker as being in cash, that it would move directly to settlement without the requirement for a financial account being provided with a settlement amount item to actually release that transaction.
So how does that fit in the query process? So if a TA comes in with a cash settlement and it gets queried, obviously the APD won't be met. So how does that...
It would only be where the situation is it is deemed valid and agreed. Therefore, the outcome of box 9B would kick into that settlement process, part 16, and as Tim's pointed out, that would also include, as part of step 11, including the payment date.
I think that needs a bit more work around that piece, to be honest.
Is there anything specific there, Mark?
Yeah, I don't understand if the broker sends a TA in with an APD, so there's a settlement date, and it's not accepted, how do you deal with the payment?
Sorry, Mark, the broker doesn't send in the APD. The APD is applied once the transaction is confirmed as correct.
Yeah,
so I think what you're referring to is the settlement due date, which is slightly different. It's sort of presentation date rather than the actual payment date.
So does the APD come from the broker though, Tim?
No, it comes from central services. So in today's world, the ANS submission goes in, technician does all the checking, and once everything's okay, that's when they allocate the signing number, and that's when the actual payment date being 3 working days in advance of when that finishes. So you can't do it in advance because you don't know exactly when the transaction is going to be fully agreed. So it's an output rather than input.
So if that happens in terms of it goes into DXC look at it as a warranty on it and it's due tomorrow, how do they meet that warranty?
That's the difference between presentation date or settlement due date versus actual payment date. So the presentation date would be the date that the TA is received. And in terms of warranties, the warranty will be met as long as the transaction doesn't ultimately get rejected. So if it takes a couple of days to process queries, as long as ultimately is completed, then the warranty is deemed as being met.
Okay. So it's quite key that turnaround times are in line with what we have.
The processing targets obviously are up for discussion, but they would be my belief is would be equivalent to current or better than current.
Okay, yeah, understand.
Moving on to the settlement process. So as I said before, the default position for EBOT is a two-stage process: agreement of the technical account. Once that technical account is agreed, then the broker can prepare a financial account message to identify one or more technical accounts for which they wish to settle. Each of those technical accounts is identified in the FA message through a settlement amount item. There is again a level 3 validation of that financial account against the schema and the validator. and all of those steps would be conducted by the ASG Adept Gateway, and you would get your level 3 application validation acknowledgement, or you'd get your level 3 application validation rejection message if it was in error. The financial account type, the EBOT guidelines allude to actions where the type is settlement advice. For the Bureau Services DPS, that type settlement advice is not supported. So effectively, everything flows through to step 5. I've got my I've got my numbering mixed up, but the second box 5 then looks at the validity of the individual settlement amount item. If there is issue with that, and issue with that could be that it does not identify to a previously agreed technical account, for example, then it would get rejected. Otherwise, it goes to a step where sanctions checks are applied. Any settlement group checks are applied. For example, a simultaneous premium reinstatement with the settlement of one or more claims amounts, that type of thing is checked. Those would be raised out of band, so they would be visible through the query portal to the broker, but they are not visible through an acknowledgement response. If they pass those checks, then you have an acceptance acknowledgement of the settlement amount item, and that does include the actual payment date on which that item would be settled. The process can support both in full payment of a technical account or one or more partial payments of the technical account.
In step 5, I don't think there's a business validation on an FA. You can't create the FA unless it explicitly links with the TA. There is a deferral process in the company market which we use, whereby if one of my nice counterparties wants me to settle a 10 million claim before they've paid me the premium, I can defer the FA going into the cycle. But I don't think it's correct that there's a technical validation
there. There are some validations in respect of, as I say, being able to identify that the item does relate, the settlement item does relate to a technical account. And
well, no, it has to, though, because it can't be generated. That's the whole point of it.
No, I mean, the broker can create something.
Well, in 10 years of using them, I've never seen one that disagrees. That isn't true. That's not true in how the messaging works.
Yeah, you can't do that. You can't have an FA which doesn't have an agreed TA.
It has to reconcile.
So that's step there.
But at step 5, there is a defer process, but I wouldn't see it being used in the joint venture because you have to flow all the transactions. But in the company market, we do use it to stop massive claim payments when we haven't been paid the premiums.
Okay, none of that step 5 is in relation to credit control issues. It is automated checks of the settlement amount item links to an agreed technical account item, that the item hasn't already been paid by.
But there are no automated checks. I don't understand what they are. Within EBOT, there are no. You can't generate it. It does all those checks pre-generation. I mean, let's maybe take it offline, but
yeah,
I just don't think that technically lines up with how it actually works.
I don't think it does, Simon.
Okay. As I mentioned before, we will be issuing a specification which will include all the validations, automated validations, and that will identify those validations. It may be that, you know, some of these are very edge things, but
John,
it's still a responsibility to try and do those.
John, forgive me if I've got this wrong, but I would have thought that FA items business validation is just verifying that the amounts quoted on the FA match the amounts quoted that you've already pre-agreed on the matching technical account.
Yeah, but you can't
That's
even
all it
issue
is,
it though,
right?
Carissa. My point is the broker can't issue it if those lines don't match up.
Yeah.
So we don't need to recheck something that's already validated over hundreds of thousands of messages.
Yeah.
The thing to bear in mind is obviously the central services will be accepting FAs from various systems, right? Big, small. So we need to ensure we have a level of checking on our side of the fence as well, to ensure we don't allow invalid messages to go through. So that's the intent behind that, Simon. But like you said, maybe
there shouldn't be though, Jay, on that one. So what happens is you get a TA and it's got a referred tech account in the FA, so you shouldn't have that issue, and it should be the same amount. If it isn't, we've got a problem.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's review that as we start to do walkthroughs on this and see how the rubber hits the road. You know,
as I say, we will issue the list of validations which we perform, and if there is overall consensus that those validations do not need to be made, and then we can withdraw them. But we still believe there is a responsibility as a service provider to validate the data which we've been advised of.
Tim's got his hand up. Tim.
Sorry.
Just a quick point on at 7, where you've got the question about whether a transaction can be settled. Presumably that's not just sanctions, but it will also be the settlement block process that carriers can initiate. So question from me would be, what happens if there is an issue at 7? So what are the implications for the PPW and the prompt payment discount type transactions if those blocks are in place that affect, say one carrier, but the rest of the market should still be able to go ahead?
Wouldn't they just be rejected, Tim? I would expect. If we're looking at a delinked behind the scenes, aren't we? So they can't be released.
Yeah, so if that is the case, if they are rejected because of a sanction that may not apply to other markets on there, and because of that the broker's in breach of a payment warranty, do those carriers then have the ability to cancel the cover if there's been significant claims in the meantime? Because there's a sanction.
They can't. So currently they can't release a delink signing for PPWs out of date. So I assume that's the same.
Not if it's out of date. So the question here is, it's in date, but because there's a settlement block in place, it can't be processed. So the broker's expecting it to go through on a Monday. There's a sanctions in place, so that it takes time to review those sanctions, or there's a settlement in place by the carrier. So by the time that's resolved, it gets to Wednesday, by which time the payment warranty is already breached.
So the client's off cover.
Exactly.
So how is that handled today, Tim, in those scenarios?
I don't know, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, we are still bound by, bureau level processing and settlement at the bureau level as well. So if there is a problem with the submission, even if it's in a subscription model context, the entire work package is held back, I think is my understanding, and that's how it works today. And I expect that will be the case tomorrow for day one as well. At some point, if we get to being able to not just process individual submissions, but also settle them individually, which would require changes to central settlement systems, then potentially we could look at creating that separation at the individual carrier level. But at the moment, I don't think it exists.
I think you need to, because each de-link signing is per carrier. So, I mean, Sarah Sawyer's on the call, she knows this better than me, but I believe that if you try to release a de-link signing and it's past the PPW, you can't release it per carrier.
Yeah, I think that is the case, Mark. Yeah. What I was going to say actually was just that if so in today's world, Jay, you're right, the work package gets rejected. But in tomorrow's world, we won't have that team here as a broker that does those submissions, that put those work packages in. So who, if you're going to reach out of band, who are you going to reach out to? Because that could be an email going into someone's inbox and there's a warranty that's expiring the next day and they don't get to that email. So I think that needs to be looked at.
Yeah, from a broker perspective, Sarah, I think, that's unacceptable. You need to understand
we need at least the rejection to come back in so that we can have some kind of automated process back here.
Yeah.
Okay. I think if the question is more about being able to issue a message back to indicate there's a problem that can, then be consumed by a system, I think that I think we can definitely explore, Sarah. Sorry, I misunderstood the point in that case. So let's take that one away as well. That's okay. I think the generation of the message back is possible. It may not be shown very clearly here, but I think that should be possible.
Yeah, it would have to be the rejection though. There isn't a query option available.
No, there isn't. You're correct. That would be a rejection. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so Jay, have you made a note of that? I mean, I just scribbled something, but
yeah, I have.
Just do it a bit more formally for me. Thank you. Moving on from the process flows, just briefly, we are developing capability, which will be a portal, which would support the creation of an EBOT submission via a user interface. And that includes elements where it can create the technical account, group technical accounts, etc., and submit those. And those would then go through level 3 validation and be injected into the EBOT process flow, as we've seen, as if that message had originated from the broker themselves within their own system environment. The submissions through this market portal will be at Bureau work package level, so it will automatically do that account entry, referencing, etc. And it will also support the settlement flow as well, and the level 3 and level 4 responses, etc., would go back to that user interface within the portal for the broker user to view. So as I said before, this is just to aid adoption for those people who have not made the full-blown investment in ACORD messaging or in third-party provided software to support ACORD messaging within their host environments. Moving on, ID agencies, just to clarify, it's been on the previous slides, the identity for the party role will be as a service provider for the receiver. We will issue the particular Dun & Bradstreet code to be used at a later date, but the individual insurers and reinsurers would still be identified by their own identities. We're proposing to support Dun & Bradstreet code, as that's the referential agency for EBOT, but also the Lloyd's RU, Lerma, and Lloyd's Brussels subsidiary code sets for the identification of the insurers and reinsurances. If we receive messages which don't use one of those ID agencies, then that again would be an example of one of our automated validations, and it would raise a query back to the broker. The DUNS code is the code which should be used for identifying the sender and receiver pair. As say, the other code sets, Lloyd's, RU, Lerma, Lloyd's Brussels, are more appropriate for identification of the insurer or reinsurer, where those Lloyd's, RU, Lerma, Lloyd's, Brussels code sets are not used, and Dun & Bradstreet is used to identify a particular insurer and reinsurer, then there needs to be a degree of care to ensure that the Dun & Bradstreet code resolves to an individual underwriting entity in terms of a Lloyd's syndicate number, an RUA, RU stamp code, or a Lloyd's Brussels insurance company, a Lloyd's insurance company syndicate number for Lloyd's Brussels. So Dun & Bradstreet for sender receiver, ideally Lloyd's, RU, Lerma for the other participants in the contract.
So quick question on the sender receiver bit. So something we've raised under the Vanguard group on the service provider. So we're talking here the message envelope rather than the body of the message. But it would be very useful if the DUNS code used for service provider for the JV, London Market, so sequence 3, 4, etc., was different to the DUNS code used for the JV as service provider for sequence 2. Because for us as carriers, that would be a significant benefit if we were able to identify easily where the transaction was being processed. At the moment, it looks like you're using the same DUNS for both services. So similar to what you're just describing there, it helps you identify if we use Lloyd's, AOU and Lerma numbers where there's multiples. The same applies for us from the service provider point of view, identifying what we need to do if they're different.
Yeah, fully understand that, Tim. So yeah, we'll take that away and seek to get that confirmed. And as I say, within the formal specification, we will publish what that Dun & Bradstreet code should be for the EBOT channel.
So Tim, sorry, Rob here, quick question. If Swiss Re was a customer of the global services and remains a customer of the, or for want of a better phrase, London Market services, all being delivered off the same digital processing services platform, would you expect Swiss Re to hold 2 contracts with XIS or 1?
Well, certainly there will be different services applied. Whether it's, I assume 2 really, because not everyone's going to sign up to both, are they?
But what's important? No, that's right. But what's important to you is the ability to distinguish where XIS has served Swiss Re as a global customer and distinguish that from where XIS has served Swiss Re as a London Market customer. Is that right? Have I understood that correctly?
Yeah, and the reason being that as a global customer, we're obviously doing all of the business validations ourselves and putting all of our business rules in place. Versus the London Market, we may be a follower, therefore there's certain different processes that need to be followed, and some carriers might have different modules within systems or even different systems for the 2 services. So it'd be good to be able to identify which service is being deployed so that we can channel the messages and do the appropriate processing.
I mean, probably a rubbish metaphor, but are you shaking the left or right hand of the JV when you are engaging them in a service, basically?
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's entirely the reason why we asked for DPS to be recognised as service provider, whereas within the global proposition, the receiver would be the individual company who'd subscribed to that global service as the receiver.
No, that's not the case. Under the Vanguard Group, there's two, same as the London market, there's two message exchange, one from the broker to the JV as service provider, and then they will take a copy of that message, change certain amount of data in it, and create a message from the service provider as a sender to carrier as a receiver.
So is that similar to T-mail, Tim?
Not quite. So within T-mail, obviously they can only use the envelope. So where under CSRP there is a specific line of code in there that identifies it needs to be directed to XCS as the service provider. Uses the same DUNS code as has been proposed for both the JV London market and the JV global solutions.
Okay, so header DUNS code is to what DXC and payloads to the underwriter.
So the envelope identifies exactly where it's going. So if you imagine in a paper process, you might have a windowed envelope. If you're sending something, say, from Germany to the UK, obviously the post office in Germany can see it's UK, so they put it on a plane straight away. Ends up in a distribution centre. That distribution centre then looks at the details in the envelope that says, OK, I know the postcode, therefore I know where to send it to a local distribution centre. When it gets there, they look it up and says, I know the house number and I know the postcode, so I know which postman or postwoman to give it to deliver it. So it's that transmission bit in the envelope versus the body has other details.
So the latter is the body, isn't it, in terms of where DXC send it to?
No, that's in the envelope. The body is all the business information.
Okay.
We might need to come back to you, Tim, on getting some clarity of that between what is header and then what we put in the body. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, conscious we've only got 6 minutes left, and this is probably one of the main sections which people want to talk about. So the availability of data to carrier participants. This is for phase 2. The scope of the build is to provide a copy of the technical account message data at fundamental split level to each insurer based upon the agreement of that technical account by the Bureau. It will be a new message because it's got a different sender, a new sender, receiver, and it will have its own UUID. It'll have a technical account type of no response required, so it's being provided on a for information only basis. The supporting information aggregate will reference the identifiers to the documents held in the IMR, not where the documents were referenced to in the original technical account provided by the broker. And that supporting information will also reference any documents which were received in stream from the broker but were crystallized out and put into the IMR as a document. The resource identifiers and IMR will support the ability to make a DRI request to download those documents where the care recipient has access to those documents. I'm sorry. The documents presented by the broker will be held in the IMR. There will be a generated work package reference which they will appear under. All the care participants on the same transaction will be able to view those documents unless the broker has explicitly identified those documents as being something which is confidential to the relationship between DPS and the broker, and is therefore not visible, designed to be visible to the carrier. The IMR will also hold details of the signing for that work package. The status of the work package will also be there, and in pretty much all other respects, the way that IMR works as a document repository for phase 2 is going to be unchanged, irrespective of the approach, the channel by which the broker has presented the transaction to DPS. There are some conversations being held about potential future changes to IMR, but in terms of the scope for phase 2, it should be regarded as essentially the same as it is today.
So, John, just quickly, in terms of confidential docs, how will you identify from one TA submission which is confidential to one underwriter and not the other?
So they can be in the broker can choose to include a document as part of supporting information aggregate for the technical account for an individual carrier, but not reference that same document in the supporting information for other carriers. So that case, the ACL would be restricted just to that carrier. Whereas wherever it references the same document to multiple carriers, then the ACL would reference all of those carriers would have access to it.
So how would you work that out? Through a document sent by DRI, or multiple documents?
So we either have two technical options available to us, and we haven't determined exactly how we would do this. One is in the copy technical account, you would only see supporting information which you were allowed to access. That's the desired approach, and therefore you'd know that if you made a DRI download request against those documents, you would retrieve them. The alternative is that we have a common set of supporting information, and when you did make the DRI request, if you weren't allowed access to that document, that DRI download request would fail. So that's not the preferred approach, but technically we haven't designed and built that component of how we would create the supporting information in the outbound copy of the technical account.
Okay.
Carriers will also be able to view any queries raised by DPS to the broker, either as a part of the automated validation, the sanctions check, or the technician's validation, and those would be visible through the query portal. We do not have the ability within phase 2 to support carrier interchange of acknowledgement response messages to those queries, so it would only be via the user interface of the portal. And the final feature of phase 2 is the signing that DPS will expose a number of APIs to support access to the signing detailed data at the non-fundamental level.
Quick question on this one. Not sure we're going to get through all the slides, but in terms of what we received, you got the available once the DPS technician had agreed the transaction. So bearing in mind that through phase 2, there's going to be some brokers sending in TAs, others still on the old ANS work packages, etc. Until everyone gets onto the phase 2 solution, as carriers, we're still going to be receiving some EDI messages and some TAs. So and that would be different across the market. So carrier A might receive a TA versus carrier B receiving EDI message. Where
you would still continue where you would still continue to receive EDI messages. These aren't alternates. This is in addition to receiving your current levels of reporting via EDI messages, you would also, at the point of agreement of the technical account, be able to receive a copy of what was provided by the broker.
Okay, so where we choose to receive a copy of the TA, what you're saying is we will still get the EDI record for all, and we will get a TA. So we need to identify and make sure that we don't process that same transaction twice.
Yeah, so the technical account type comes through as no response required.
No response, but the same for EDI and the record for all, there is no response. But when we receive it, we process or we check, validate a record in our systems. Here we're getting 2 items that relate to the same transaction, and therefore we could be processing that same transaction twice. So we need to make sure that where we get the TA, we haven't already processed the EDI version of it.
Tim, could we take that away, please? Because I think we need a conversation with the team that is sort of responsible for the generation of the EDIs to bottom that out. I'm also conscious we are 2 minutes, we've overrun by 2 minutes. So you're absolutely right. We won't be able to get through the remaining 2 slides, particularly as the next one is a process flow. So could we circle back amongst ourselves, and we'll speak to the engagement team about the next steps, whether we organize a subsequent session. I know we've taken a few actions from this session, so we can walk through the remaining 2 slides in that session and also follow up on some of the actions, the timing of it, etc. We'll have to work out with the engagement team. Is that all right with the group? Because I'm conscious people might have to.
Jay, the other thing is I think this whole carrier piece needs a lot of thought on it, because we seem to we talk about it and we get stuck on the broker side, but then we really aren't getting into the carrier side. So I think there's almost like a separate discussion to be had with carriers, because to me at the moment a lot of the things we've asked for have just been overlooked. I was under the understanding that we were now looking at not using the supplementary API, and we were going to get that included. That's what I'd heard through the blueprint grapevine, but that doesn't look to be the case. I think we just need to talk this through, because it's just, to me, it just seems more complexity coming on the carrier side that we're going to have to try and sort out, and it's just not clear to me how we're going to get benefit from this.
Sure. Yeah, I think let's do a separate session.
We do need to start, and I'm saying this now because I think that we need to start talking about this now, because otherwise we're in a very tricky situation, because we have a lot of processing on our side that needs to be carried out, and it's not clear to me how we're going to be able to make sure that we've got all the data that needs to be processed and it's all going to be processed on time and all of that kind of stuff. We need to make sure all those things are being dealt with, but at the moment it seems a little bit like, yeah, we'll be ready, but we'll have something. And to Tim's point there, if we had to start checking for duplicates and that kind of stuff between EDI and TA, that could make things even worse. So we do need to talk about this more urgently.
Yeah, because that's sorry, just about I thought if it came as a TA and you didn't get an EDI, you choose one part for the other. You don't get both.
So James, that's why I've said let's park that one. I think I'm not quite sure you would get both, but again, let me take that away, because there's a separate team we're dependent on for that. So we'll bring that to the next session. Is that all right?
I do look at this, Jay, and just think there are a lot of gaps on the carrier side.
Yeah.
So the broker side and DPS, yeah, I understand that, but we haven't got enough understanding.
Sure. Yeah. That was the intention behind. John has very rightly, I think, separated the broker and the carrier flows. We wanted to spend enough time on the carrier side as well, and acknowledge that the carrier side does have requirements that we have already acknowledged, but we are not able to fit into the scope of the DPS program as it stands. But you will see a slide at the end, which I'd encourage you to go through, which talks about what items are being considered by the design office. So these would need to be formally authorized, sponsored, and be adopted into our scope, and they'd have to be timelines agreed for it. So I think all of that process is underway, but we are not the ones in this team to be able to commit to any of these items. So if we can leave on that note, but we will have a separate session to go through the carrier flows for sure, and we'll, if there's any other requirements or issues coming out of that, we take those away and we'll follow up as we have been doing. So,
okay, we need that sooner rather than later, though.
Sure.
I can't express that anymore. If we can't get these conversations now and get these basic requirements outlined, then yeah, which it's just not going to work. So okay.
Okay. Right, John. Anything else from you before, apart from thanking the group?
Yeah. Thank you, as always, for your inputs. We do appreciate them, and we do take note of them. As Jay's alluded to, the carrier side conversation is has higher levels of uncertainty, and is more has a bigger basis difference between what is required and what is proposed within phase 2. We'd fully acknowledge that, but yeah, we need to have more conversations to close that gap and see how we can navigate to a workable position for phase 2, and have an avenue to move forward with the more extended support for carriers as part of future phases. So we acknowledge and recognise the issues you're raising to us. We're not dismissive of them in any way.
All right. Thanks everyone for joining. Thank you, John, presenting. Yes. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much. Thanks.
John.
Bye.
Thank you.